All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Shrinking Classics podcast. In this podcast, what we do is my mom and I, we both love literature and psychology. And so what we do in this podcast is we, in a sense, take a classic to the shrink and we take some time and we psychoanalyze it a little bit, talk about the characters and what they're going through. Um, and we just have some fun with it. And it's nothing intimidating. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and so it's nothing scary, just something fun and a good way to take a different look at some great works of literature. And then I'll let my mom kind of introduce herself a little bit, and then we'll get rolling.
Thanks, Caleb. And I'm Leslie, and like Caleb said, I love Greek classics. And my degree is in marriage and family, which is a combination of psychology and sociology focused on the family.
Awesome, yeah. So we're excited. We've we were talking on the phone a few months ago now, and we were both just enjoying our conversation um, about literature, and we thought we'd just do a podcast about it. So here we are. We decided that today we wanted to start by talking about um, a great work by John Steinbeck, which is "The Moon Is Down." Um, so this is specifically it's one of my mom's favorite books, and I also really liked it. But I'm going to let her take the lead on it because I just think it's a really great book, and she does a really great job of explaining some things she likes about it. One thing I did want to mention is the name of the book. I think is kind of fun. The Moon Is Down. I was doing a little bit of research because I didn't know why it was called that, and it actually comes from Macbeth. So that it's a line of Macbeth when they're getting ready to go and kill Duncan. So I feel like what it's saying is it's a foreshadowing. The moon is down is a foreshadowing of that dark times are coming for the town in the book. Um, that's my interpretation of it, at least. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I didn't know that. I think that's really cool. You know, I think this is a great book to start with because I love John Steinbeck, but because of his understanding of human nature. It's just amazing to me. But also, this is one of I feel like his lesser known books. And so the one I'd like to kind of bring to light a little bit more. So a great beginning.
Right. No, I agree. It's been fun seeing. It was fun reading through the book because it is a kind of a war setting, and so you get to see um, the lives of these people in the story change. Although it only and it's interesting because he really only talks about it kind of subtly, and for a lot of people, like there's a large group, it's a whole town, but he kind of explains what the town is going through in the lives of just a few individuals, and I think that's kind of is very well done.
Yeah, I think we should probably give a little introduction for people that
Yeah,
aren't familiar with The
yeah,
Moon Is
for
Down.
sure.
The John John Steinbeck wrote it as some positive propaganda, if you will. Some we usually think of propaganda as the bad thing, but it's not
Right.
necessarily bad. It's what is propaganda? Help me out. I'm drawing
Right.
a
No,
blank.
I always forget what propaganda is, but I think essentially um, it's a form of information pushed by a certain source, and it's not always true, but it's also not always wrong. Typically, when we think of propaganda, it's usually something that's like harmful for a purpose, um, whereas it doesn't always have to be harmful, like my mom was saying. Um, that's my understanding of it, at least.
Yeah, and it was like a message he wanted to promote about the war to help people, and particularly to help people like what they had been where the Nazis had come in and invaded, right?
Right.
And so in The Moon Is Down, he uses an unnamed town with an unnamed army, which I like because then it could apply to different time periods. But it was specifically during World War II that was published. And the people in Europe who had been invaded by the Nazis loved it. Like hundreds of thousands of copies of the book were distributed. They translated it themselves, and some people copied it by hand, they smuggled copies
Man.
because you know, it just was powerful for them. But what's really fascinating is, so over in Europe, people are loving it. The people that needed the message loved it. Here in America, where the people were not directly involved in the fight, they're like, oh, that's terrible. And I mean, some people here in America loved it, but some critics were very fiercely against it. And they said one of them was Clinton Fattyman, and I just remember him because he gave this other quote that I really liked. But anyway, I think he was wrong about the moon is down, and he said that Steinbeck had made the Nazis too human,
Mm,
and he didn't like that, right?
interesting.
And you know what I thought was really interesting about that is I feel like by by saying that he's making the same mistake that people always make in war. Like the only way you can get people to go out and kill other people in mass like that is to convince them that their enemy is not human, right? So you see that
Right.
war after war. You got to convince people that the enemy is not human, they're evil, they're monsters, or whatever, right? And we
Right.
know now all the terrible things that the Nazis said about the Jewish people to get the German people to go along with them. But I feel like in reverse, Clinton, Fattyman, and other people like him that criticize the moon is down because oh heaven forbid he made the Nazis human, are doing the same thing, devaluing, dehumanizing the enemy. Isn't that interesting?
Right. No, and you're totally right that in order to have war, you need to view people as less than yourself, which in a psychological term is dehumanization, which is very on the nose. Um, and yeah, that's exactly, especially what the Nazis did, is they not only talked about the Jewish people like they weren't even people at all, and they treated them like they weren't people, but they took away their names, they took away their identity, they just called them by a number. So then they were basically just property. And it's really sad, but yeah, it's true. It's a two-way street that if you view the Nazis as just monsters, then you are also in turn dehumanizing them to allow you to think terrible things about another human being, even if maybe they're justified. But yeah, it is a two-way street, and you need to be aware that if you are going to be calling one person a monster because of how they act towards a person, then you are in turn um, kind of crossing a border that you might not be aware of, that you are also dehumanizing somebody else. And so that's a good point. I didn't usually think about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that Steinbeck, one of the things he was telling people, like a way to fight back, is to recognize that your enemy is human. That's one of the things I love about Steinbeck. He's just brilliant, right? It's about
Right.
recognizing that their enemies, in this case, like the Nazis, are human. They're in the story, the invading soldiers, they were lonely. They were far from home. They wanted to go home. They're in some foreign place. They miss their families. The people that they've conquered don't like them. And
Right.
there's just a humorous moment where one of the soldiers goes to this woman's house and he just wants you know, some man and woman time. I'm not talking about sex, but just to be a man and a woman and have a conversation. And he tells her, "Can we just put the war aside for a moment?" And just, you like, as if she could, you know. So,
Yeah,
and
no,
I think,
that's a very interesting part of the book too, and I'm excited to talk about that because I have a lot of highlights in that section because there's a lot of stuff that it really does. It shows that um, the two-way street of dehumanization, of that he has been being dehumanized and he's dehumanized the people, but now he's realized that it's kind of lonely being one of the only humans in the area, and so he's trying to undo it, but the damage has been done. And so yeah, that's a fascinating part of the book.
yeah, and I think another thing that stands out to me about that idea of not seeing the enemy as human, not seeing the enemy as monsters, but as human beings. It reminds me of Gavin De Becker in his book, The Gift of Fear.
Hmm.
Like he talks about, you have to realize that anybody, that people can do these things. If you just imagine that the people that do these terrible things are these monsters, then you're going to miss the threats that come into your life. You have to recognize that the sometimes bad people look like everyday people. Does that make sense?
Right.
I'm sure Gavin DeBecker said it way better than I did,
Yeah.
but
No, I like
I just
that.
think
That's really good.
that the dehumanization really weakens both sides. I
Yeah.
feel like that's one of the major themes of the book is that if you see your enemy as in this case, your invader as a human being, that means there's someone that can be overcome. Gives you strength.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Um, yeah. So I guess let's dive into the book. Um,
Let's do it.
so is there anything you wanted to start off with in the beginning? Um, there is one quote that I like, just right in the beginning. It's just kind of describing the mayor's house, or the mayor's, I guess, the town hall, if you would. Um, and there's a line in there. Um, it says, "Nor water, nor fire, nor earthquake could do a child in as long as a big dog was available." Um, I just think that's a kind of fun quote because it does kind of. I grew up with a German Shepherd, and so it was a big dog, and I always felt safe because there was a big dog available, and so no matter what happened, I knew the dog would protect me, even though. I mean, what is he going to do from a fire or an earthquake? But that is, it's just a good quote because that is how I felt growing up with a big dog. So that was just kind of fun. Anyways,
You know, it's right. I have that line highlighted too. I love
right,
that. I love that. And right after that, one of the main characters is the old Dr. Winter. And I love how he says that he watched in amazement while his thumb rolled over and over on his lap. Dr. Winter was a man so simple that only a profound man would know him as profound.
right. No,
I
I
like
like
that.
that. It's kind of like the phrase that only that a fool is known for as much speaking. Um, it's one of those things where you're like, typically you don't think of it like that, but a profound man would know him as profound.
Right. Well, he did turn out to be a profound man, but he was also
Yeah,
a simple man. I like
right.
that. Oh, and then he also says then that Joseph, who was one of the servants, was so complicated that only a profound man would know him to be simple. So I
That's
guess what he's
funny.
trying to say is, you know, that what you see on the surface is not always what is true.
Right. No, and that's true. It's that you'll often, I mean, and that's the thing. I don't, people talk a lot about first impressions, and there's some, I do get that there's some weight to them, but I don't remember a single person's first impressions because assuming that you talk to the person for longer than what, 6 seconds, then that first impression has already kind of worked its way out of your working memory anyways. And so granted, if you make a bad first impression, it can kind of get seared into the working memory a little bit more, and so it just sticks there. But ultimately, first impressions aren't really what matters. It's what you do um, for the duration of your conversation or your relationship with that person. And so someone may be perceived as a simple person or a profound person um, because of how they speak or how they don't speak. But it's not until you really get to know them that you'll actually know the answer.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And there's another part I like right near the beginning. There was I don't know where the page is right now, but basically there was a spy who had been living in the town amongst the people and reporting to the invaders. And so I just think it was interesting that once the invaders were done with the spy, they wanted to, you know, they're done with them, toss them aside like nobody valuable. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like they want him to leave. We're going to ship you back to Europe or wherever it was. You know what I mean? They didn't give any names in the book, but they're going to ship him back to the homeland because his deed is done and we don't need you anymore. And he wanted to stay. He's like, oh no, I can stay and I can be a leader and I can help you. And the what was his name? The the leader of the invaders told him,
Yeah.
no, you won't be any good to us now because the people once they realize what you've done, they're going to hate you.
Right. Yeah. Colonel
Yeah.
Lancer.
Oh yeah, thank you, Colonel
Right.
Lancer.
And it's true because and that's the funny thing about being a spy is it's kind of like being a snitch, if you would, that that you're valuable to the person you're giving the information to. But then as soon as that information has kind of run its course, then all of a sudden you're much less valuable because if you're willing to betray a whole group of these people, then what's keeping you from betraying the person that you're working for? And so there's an element of, your job is down here, you're a liability, get out of here. But yeah, the guy in the book, he's like, no, they all know me, they love me, I'm super cool, they're my friends, and they're not his friends.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. Again, it's that dual thing where he's like among these people and befriending them, but he's secretly using them, right?
Right.
And he doesn't understand a blind spot that the powers that be that sent him in are using him in much the same way.
Hmm.
He just doesn't get it that it goes both ways, kind of like the dehumanization went both ways, right? And
Yeah.
so Lancer tells him, I think you'll never again know what's going on here. I think no one will speak to you, right? And then he says, I think the Corell, that's the name of the spy, he thinks that the mayor's the one that should leave. And Lancer says, oh no, Mayor Orton is more than a mayor. He is his people. He knows what they're doing and thinking without asking because he will think what they think. And by watching him, I will know them. He might
Right.
say. So, yeah, I think that's I don't know, just funny. Coyle just kind of missed the blind spot. The way he was telling the golden rule, how you treat other people is how you'll be treated. And that's what came back to the spy. He got used the same way he was using people.
Right. And you're totally right that he really does have a blind spot, and we all do. Um, there's there's a book I was reading, and it talks about blind spots. I'm blanking on the name, but it doesn't really matter. But and there's another quote where Corell is talking about. He says these aren't fierce people. They haven't had a war for 100 years. They've forgotten about fighting, and and it just shows how naive he really is, that he thinks that he's able to come into this town, and I guess maybe even narcissistic. He's able to come into this town and betray everybody and just think that they're gonna just kind of be cool with it because they don't know what it's like to be in a war. And
Because they're just peaceful people.
right, they're just simple, free people who don't know about fighting. Um, and yeah, he has another thing coming.
Yeah. Because you mean they've been put in a position now they're going to fight. And Lancer, the colonel of the invaders, he understands it. He says there are no peaceful people. There are no friendly people. Can't you understand we are at war with these people? Once you're at war, you change things. They the setting, if you will, has changed.
Right. No, it's true. And it's just the whole environment of everything is just totally different in a war environment. Not that I would know from personal experience, but just in this book, I feel like
Exactly.
I feel like Steinbeck does such a good job at showing that even if it's some, I guess, reasonably peaceful takeover, I think there was um 6 men who were killed in order to take over that town. Just kind of the guards, I guess. And
Mhm.
so on a grand scheme of things, that's relatively peaceful. It's just there were 6 people who died, which is sad, but there's so many worse things that could have happened. And so I think that the enemy in this story, of especially all the soldiers who come in, they start to think, oh well, it's just they are a peaceful people because we only had to take out 6 people and then we're good, and so they're not going to put up a fight, just like conquering didn't take over. Um, and it's just something that they're just missing. It's a blind spot that a lot of the inexperienced soldiers have throughout the book, that they think that because things were simple in the beginning, it's just going to stay that way, and that people will just be like, okay, cool, just roll over and let them walk all over them. And it's through propaganda. It's the government that these or the state that the invaders were working for. they convince them that it's just their job and that it's not going to be an issue. Just go and do what you're told, and everything will be fine. And they believed it.
Yeah, isn't that like, I feel like that's true to life. Like in this book, especially Steinbeck, I like to look at ways that this could apply to us. Like, fortunately, we don't live in an area where our country's been overtaken by invaders. But I think there are other ways, that these lessons could apply to us. Like, it's a very common thing in life where the nice guy, people think the nice guy is going to let you just walk all over them, but that's not necessarily so. Maybe they're nice right now because you've been nice to them. That doesn't mean they don't know how to stand up for themselves when
Right.
if you put them in that position to need to do that, right? And I think that the one of the things I take away from this book is encouragement to those nice guys to fight back when you need to. You got to fight back, and these are some ideas how you can do it. You know.
Right. And now, and I think if I'm remembering right, um, Corel does end up dying, right?
Um, Gosh, I can't remember. I know they did try to attack him, but I think he got rescued and
Oh, that's
taken
true.
away.
Maybe it was just that. But either way,
But
it was at
yeah,
least an
they
attempt.
they definitely tried to get rid of him.
Yeah. And so it just shows that it's like he thought that he was hot stuff and he wasn't.
Yeah, and he thought that basically he thought nice meant weak, and that is not.
Right.
That is sometimes it might be the case, but generally I think not. Nice
Yeah.
people are not necessarily weak. They're just not.
Right. No, it's
You know.
true. And I think and I guess maybe skipping ahead if that's all right. Then there's when um oh, I forget what his name was. Was it Andrew or Aaron? There's a point in the story when one of the guards, the invaders, comes in and is telling these free people to work. And one of those people is just they're not having it. And so they end up killing the guard. And now it puts the invaders in this predicament because they have to hold up the law. They have to hold up order, or else everyone's just going to riot. And so they're trying to figure out how to do that. But they also know that if they kill this person, then it also just might start a riot right out. And so they're trying to talk to Mayor Orton to see if he can kind of work some magic and say, well, he did break the law and he killed this man. And so because of that, then he has to be killed. But Mayor Orton, he throws it back in their face. He's like, well, didn't you guys kill 6 people to get in here? So therefore, you guys also killed people. And he tells Colonel Lancer, he says, look, if you kill the soldiers who killed those men, then I'll agree that fair is fair. And obviously the colonel can't do that. And so the mayor doesn't do it either. And it's the beginning of the snowball. It's kind of like, if you would, the moon is setting and it's going down. And it just kind of
Right.
shows that things are going to get a lot worse as the time goes on. There's a line in here that uh, Lancer says. He says, "You know as well as I that punishment is largely for the purpose of deterring the potential criminal," and which I like a lot, because punishment isn't necessarily for the individual, even though it is, but it's also a deterrent. It's for the potential criminal. There's a lot of people who'd be doing a lot worse stuff if they thought they could get away with it. And so I really
That's
like
so true.
that.
That's so true. And I love that part that you mentioned that Mayor Orton says to the colonel, because the colonel is like, oh, well, you have to follow the law and you need to execute this man that killed our soldier because that's the law. And Mayor Orton's just not having it. He's like, why do you go into this nonsense of law, Colonel? There's no law between you and us. This is war. Don't you know that you'll have to kill all of us, or in time we'll kill all of you? You destroyed the law when you came in, and a new
Right.
law took its place. So, order, like you said, the moon's down, order is gone. This is war. And that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. No, exactly. And so it's just interesting. It's a lot of stuff you don't necessarily just think about, but it totally makes sense. And I think Steinbeck nailed it. That I can imagine that this is how it would be: is that the invaders are trying to keep order. Meanwhile, they already shattered the order, and
Right.
they're just slowly building the chaos that is about to ensue. But they're trying to contain it the best they can, and it's chaos theory. It's the famous line that a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and a hurricane happens in New York or something like that. And it's just one action just leads to this ripple effect, and you don't know what's going to happen or where it's going to end. But that's
Yeah.
exactly what is going on here. The
I
the
like that.
invaders, they came in, and that was the beginning. That was the butterfly flapping its wings, and so now they just started this ripple, and we don't know where it's going until the end.
Yeah. I like that idea of chaos theory too. It seems like, that's a common ongoing mistake of people in this book, the invaders or the spy, that they create this problem and then they want the problem to go away. You know what I mean? Like the invaders, they destroyed the order by invading and now they want to have order. And the spy, he destroyed the friendship that he had with people in that town by betraying them. And now he wants to still have that friendship. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
You can't have order in war. You can't have friendship with people if you're a traitor. You, there's just certain laws of the universe that are immutable.
Yeah. No, totally. I agree. And so I think it's funny when um Colonel Lancer is trying to do everything he can to fix the situation, and the man who killed the invader was Alex. And he says, "Hey, look, Alex, are you sorry for what you did? We may be able to get you off this punishment if you just apologize." And Alex is like, No, I'm not sorry about it." And they're like, and Colonel's like, "So you would do it again?" He's like, "Well, yeah, I'm a free man, and he told me to work for him, and that's not okay. I can't stand for that, and so I'm not sorry about it." And so he does, and so Alex, he does end up getting shot, and it's and the hurricane is building.
Yes, yes. And well, never mind. That's skipping ahead. Okay, so where should we go next with this, Caleb? Help me out.
Yeah. So I think for sake of time, unless there's something you wanted to hit in chapter 5. Oh, let's hit chapter 5. I think there's a good description in here, and it's talking about how there's this
I
quote.
love
It
five.
says, all right, maybe if you want to read it, I feel like you have a better reading voice. So the
Oh,
one
thank
that's
you.
talking about, and the men always thought of home.
Oh, okay. And the men always thought of home. The men of the battalion came to detest the place they had conquered, and they were curt with the people, and the people were curt with them. And gradually, a little fear began to grow in the conquerors, and fear that it would never be over, and that they could never relax or go home. A fear that one day they would crack and be hunted through the mountains like rabbits. So the conquered never relaxed their hatred.
Yeah, and I just think that's so profound because it shows this. So now, so there's the physical warfare, and now there's the psychological warfare, which is really fascinating. That that now the invaders are doing the physical warfare, but the people of the town, they're providing the psychological warfare, which I find really fascinating in this story because it's these invaders. And I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit by talking about how so in the beginning you have these invaders and they're like, they're peaceful people, it's not a big deal, and they start to get kind of relaxed. And I think one of them goes out without his uniform on, and they start just kind of being nonchalant about things. But then Colonel Lancer's like, "Hey guys, you really can't be doing that um because the people, they're not a peaceful people," which we've talked about. And so as this time goes on, then these people, the invaders, they have this constant psychological stress of always needing to look over their shoulder, which is exhausting. So their anxiety is always up, their stress is always up. And so they're not healthy. And I'm sure in a real life situation, it doesn't describe this in the book, I don't think, but there would be a lot higher chances of illnesses, and people wouldn't be sleeping well. And so it's just not only just a psychological warfare, but also a physiological, because then with that level of anxiety and stress and adrenaline all the time, then they're not going to be healthy. And so it's just really fascinating, because it was just these soldiers who are like, look, the people back home, they said that that people will love us because we're just doing our jobs. And little did they know
Right.
that that was propaganda. That was a lie. Why would anyone love an invader? So
Yeah.
it's really well done.
Yeah. You're right. And the psychological aspect of it, and that's kind of like what we were talking about back in the beginning. That by realizing that they're human makes them, you realize you can fight back. I
Right.
mean, the
Which,
invader, you can, that psychological toll is going to take effect on your enemies or human.
right. Like one of the soldiers says, um, the enemy is everywhere. Every man, every woman, even children. The enemy is everywhere. Their faces look out of doorways. The white face behind the curtains, listening. We've beaten them. We have won everywhere, and they wait and obey, and they wait. And that's the psychological warfare, is that the soldiers, they feel like they won, but they know that they're still waiting. There's a storm brewing, and they don't think that they're ready to handle it. And uh and it's also important to mention that in the story, when soldiers start to get a little more relaxed and kind of let their guard down, or maybe they go out and drink, sometimes they don't come back. The townspeople will kill them, but no one knows who did it,
Yep.
because there's too many townspeople, and so the townspeople are slowly starting to win, and the soldiers are getting more anxious about it and getting more freaked out. And it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I love how later in that chapter, I wrote a note to myself, the psychological toll on the invaders or
Right.
ponder starts to crack. Because
Hmm.
they're a couple of the soldiers are just in there, their little room that they've taken over for themselves. And, ideally having some downtime, but they can't relax. And one of the soldiers, his name is Ponder, and he says, Captain, is this place conquered? Of course, said Locke. A little note of hysteria crept into Ponder's laughter. He said, conquered, and we're afraid. Conquered, and we're surrounded. His
Right.
laughter grew shrill. I mean, he's really starting to crack. The pressure's getting to him.
Yeah. No,
I,
that's really good.
I feel sorry for him, except that he's the invader. So,
Right. Well, I know, and
and
that's kind of the whole thing that we're talking about. Is I think it's cool that, because you do actually start to kind of feel, at least I do, start to feel a little bit for Tonder, especially when he's talking to Molly over in chapter 6, and he's like, look, he tells her, he says, I'm not a conqueror. I'm just a soldier. I'm just here because I had to be. He's like, oh, he's like, hey, look, I'll take care of you. Just give me some sort of affection. And like he's not even wanting necessarily the sexual intimacy. He's just wanting someone to actually acknowledge that he exists and to care about him, which is actually really sad. But it's also,
yeah,
again, it's
and
like,
really
what do you
so
expect,
human.
and
Yeah.
it's just
Well,
very well done.
you're right. I kind of feel for him too, because you're right. They probably either came over on false pretenses, propaganda, or who knows, maybe they were drafted and they didn't have a choice in the matter. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the irony, and this is a spoiler, um, is that the woman that he goes to visit, Molly, is the widow of the guy that was killed at the beginning of the story. And so she is not having it. He picked, of all the women in town he could have chosen, he picked the worst possible option, right?
Right. And it's interesting um because yeah, that really is what's going on, is he's having his own psychological and emotional warfare, where he is breaking and he needs someone to hold on to reality. uh And so the way I kind of see this is almost it's like the Milgram experiment in psychology, which, to summarize, is there was some students, some were told to play the prisoners and some were told to play the guards. And as the experiment went
No,
on,
that's the Stanford prison experiment.
oh yes, you're right. Yeah, so that experiment, then the people the guards started to be really mean to the prisoners. And when the whole experiment ended, then everyone was really
Excessively.
appalled and shocked by how they behaved. And this is what's going on in this story is you get these soldiers who come in and they're not necessarily bad people, but because they're forced into this situation and this role, then they start to need to act like bad people, and they start having this internal turmoil like, I'm not a bad person. This is just my job. And so then they have this conflict and this cognitive dissonance, I believe, where there's a disconnect and they're trying to fix it, but they can't.
Yeah, I love that. And even like Tonder, when he's talking to Molly, he says, they told us that people would like us, would admire us, and they do not. They only hate us. So I think it's like you said, I love that you brought up the Stanford prison experiment because I think that's just, fascinating about how people, like, not only did the guards act like guards in that experiment, but the prisoners acted like prisoners. You know, sometimes we fall into the roles that society expects of us, or that we think society expects of us, to our detriment, and that's kind of what happened to poor Tonder here. You know?
Yeah, and it's very, very fascinating to see. I really like the books that have these psychological aspects in them. And it's almost like Crime and Punishment in a way where you start to see the man's their mental turmoil. And it's really fascinating to watch it. If you haven't read Moon is Down, there's spoilers in this, but it's still worth the read, and I would totally recommend checking it out. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the ending of the book. So if you haven't read it yet, I would still recommend it, and I would even recommend still finishing out the podcast. It will be a spoiler knowing how it ends, but my mom's going to explain it because when I read it, it was kind of confusing. It felt like I was just kind of like left in the dark. I was like, wait, what just happened? And so this will either help. You can either finish it now or finish it when you finish the book. But either way, read the book. Okay, so let's talk about the ending.
Okay, so in the ending, the mayor and the doctor, they're basically captured, and they have this discussion, right, with a soldier standing there, so they can't really speak freely. But it's a coded discussion, and that's part of the reason it's confusing, right? They start talking about a play they were in together. I think it was in college where they did. It was about Socrates' death by Plato,
Right.
right? And so they kind of go back and forth and like, oh, you always forgot that line. It was this, you know? Okay, so Dr. Winter says to the colonel, will you carry out the orders knowing they'll fail? And Lancer's face was tight. I will carry out the orders no matter what they are, but I do think, sir, a proclamation from you might save many lives, right? So anyway, they arrest the mayor. Orden says, no, they can't arrest the mayor. Orden is the mayor. The mayor is an idea conceived by free men. It will escape the arrest. And then, as they're about to take him away, probably to kill him, Dr. Winter says one of the lines from the play they've been talking about. It says, Credo, I owe a cock to Asclepius. He said tenderly, will you remember to pay the debt? Dr. Winter closed his eyes for a moment before he answered, the debt shall be paid. Orden chuckled then. I remembered that one. I didn't forget. He put his hand on Crackle's arm and the lieutenant flinched him away. Winter nodded slowly. Yes, you remembered. The debt shall be paid. And that's the
Right.
end. And you go, wait, what the heck? It's over? What does that mean? Well,
Right.
according to Plato, these were Socrates' last words. Socrates used his last words to thrust the Athenian authorities to attempt to silence him. So what that means is, as I'm sure I'm butchering his name, apologies, Asclepius was the god of healthy, and the sacrifice of a cock was a normal offering of thanks for recovery of illness. So Socrates believed he was cured of disease of life and was not frightened by his death. Earlier in this chapter, Orton had talked about being afraid to die and considering escape. Socrates had also been given the opportunity to escape, but he chose not to. And so Orton's telling Winter that he's overcome his fear as encouraging the resistance and telling them to fight on. By using these words of Socrates, he's saying, I'm not afraid anymore to die. Fight on. And
Mm.
I think that Steinbeck here is brilliantly telling us as readers that it's normal as we face our own personal invaders, our personal battles, whatever they might be, whether it's a battle with our own, mental health issues or a battle with someone in our life or whatever it is, that it's normal to feel afraid sometimes, especially of death, but fight on, keep fighting. And
Right.
so that's why that's the ending. He's saying, even though Orton died, don't stop fighting. And the people, you know, and there was some lines there at the end that showed that they were still fighting and he was encouraging them. And so I just think that's beautiful, you know?
Yeah. And so then the debt shall be paid. That's saying basically fight on.
Yes, the debt shall be paid means keep fighting.
Right. Okay. No, that
This,
makes
this,
sense.
is- this is not the end. Keep fighting. That's how I take that.
Right. Because it's like I know the mayor at one point he says that he's like, look, I could tell them, no, don't keep fighting, or else they're gonna kill me. And and then he says, but you're gonna kill me anyways. And so I can say stop fighting, and then the people will be sad, but they'll keep fighting. Or I can say nothing and encourage them to keep fighting, and then they'll at least be encouraged. And so he says, so I'm not gonna say anything. And yeah, and then there's this part which now makes sense that he's saying that yeah, he's not gonna say don't stop fighting. He's gonna say, hey, look, they're gonna kill me, and you know what? You guys got to do what you got to do. Fight on, finish this out, because and because they have some they've been getting some dynamite as as the book goes on, and so the townsfolk are really starting to fight back, and they're starting to do really well, which is why Lancer is now needing to kill the mayor, which he said that he wasn't going to do, but he's desperate and he's trying to do anything he can.
Right.
And the mayor says, "Hey, look, you guys are winning. The people, the townspeople, you're winning. I'm not going to tell you to stop. And if it costs me my life, then that's okay because he says I wasn't going to live anyways."
Right. And I love how uh, Winter, the doctor, tries to explain to him that's not going to work. Right. He says, I know, said Winter, but they don't know. A time-minded people, he said, and the time is nearly up. They, the invaders, think that just because they have only one leader and one head, we are all like that. They know that 10 heads lopped off will destroy them, but we are free people. We have as many heads as we have people. And in time of need, leaders pop up among us like mushrooms.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's all part of that whole fight on idea, you know? They can knock down a few of us, but they can't kill us all. We're just going to keep fighting
Right. And
because
what a
we
great
are
line.
free people.
Right.
Yeah.
And because it's true, when you're a conqueror or an invader, then you're really only as strong as your leadership because you're in a foreign area, you don't know what's going on, you need someone to kind of direct you. Whereas when it's your own land and you're a free people, then you're going to do everything you can to protect it. And so you don't need just
Right.
one leader. You all become leaders in your own right because it's important to every single one of you. And and yeah, so I guess let's look at how that could be in our own life, um, which in a sense you could say making choices each day. That is a chance where you can be a leader in your own life. You don't have to follow somebody else. You do if if you have a goal and you're trying to do something, then fight on. The debt will be paid. Fight on, keep going. There's no reason to give up or quit. You're doing well, keep on trying. Even if you're not doing well, keep on trying.
Right. And it's normal to be afraid, but fight on.
Right. Yeah. No, this has been fun. What a good story. That's why it's a classic.
Yes, and I think that's why so many people in World War II were inspired by it. The people in Europe loved it. Hundreds of thousands of copies were
Yeah.
distributed. I
Wow.
think it gave them so much encouragement and strength.
Right. No, that's awesome. Well, cool. No, this has been really great. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I thought it was really great too. I love your thoughts. You gave me some new ideas that I hadn't considered, and
Yeah,
it's
no,
awesome.
same. No, this has been fun. I'm glad that we got to talk about it. I think this was a great one to a great book to start out on, and I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. Hopefully we can do one next week, and we'll see what happens over as time goes on. But
Sounds great.
yeah, it's been a great time. This has been Shrinking Classics, and we'll we'll get some more episodes up for anyone listening. Well, thank you all, and we'll talk to you guys later.